Skipping out on my duet, let the drums roll in, let the moving start. Get up, get down, but don't pull apart. It's the swing, not the sing.
Composing Gloves here. Today we're going to be delving a little bit further into the fully diminished 7 chord. Okay, so here we are. So it's the same chord progression as I associate with the other 7 chords. This one is a little more deliberate than I usually am. I kind of want to encourage you to do, just self-discovery, just try stuff out. But this time I put a couple examples in there kind of deliberately, just to show you some things that the full diminished chord has to offer. So I may even go back at some point and change the other ones to be a little more deliberate. But here we have a series of chord progressions, and you're going to have the blank version of this and the download link in the description. It's free, all that stuff. So, okay, this is the examples I have here are also included, but you're going to make these chord progressions. This one, I actually put it in there for you. So this one's just like a straight up example. But these other ones, mess around, get them to be the way you want them to be. I just realized this is backwards. I guess it's not backwards. I don't know. It just looks awkward like that. So, okay. What we have here is a couple examples. So here we have a 1 and then a diminished 7. And there's a lot of views on how a diminished 7, when you take the 7th scale degree and turn it into a fully diminished 7 chord, it offers some cool things, but and analyzing it gets kind of tricky for rather advanced reasons. So for now, we're just going to use it and see how we can use it in composition and worry about technical jargon later. So it just goes from C to C, but without this diminished 7, if it was just, because we already know that a regular 7 chord, if it was just B diminished, and this is our 7th scale degree, we already know that it can play the role of a 5 chord. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail in harmony too, but it can substitute in for a 5 chord. So this will already sound pretty okay because the 7 will pull naturally to the C. And that's cool. But we can make the relationship a little more dramatic. And this is when we bring up fully diminished chords, they were typically used in very dramatic to make things more passionate, or if you're angry or just really sort of dark, these are chords that are used. Who's it? Schubert? I think it's Schubert has an extraordinarily dark piece with this. It's used often Mozart used it in association with hell. So there's just options out there, just so you know. But it doesn't have to be used in sort of a scary negative context. It can be used in a really beautiful way as well. But here's the example now. If we add that 7 in. So it sort of enhances our relationship, and it feels like we said a little bit more. Like before, oh, did I just undo something I didn't want to do? Whatever. So before it was like this. And, we said some stuff, but here this is so much nicer. And the reason it behaves like this is the part explaining this behavior that it has is the part that's a little more complicated than it usually is. And I'll spare you the analysis for now. We'll talk about it some other day. So going down to our next example. So yeah, try that out. You can mess around. Another cool thing you could mess around with is you could take the 1 chord and make that a fully diminished 7 and turn this back into a regular chord, or leave it as a chord. And I'm not messing around with inversions yet because we haven't talked about them, even though I'm using them in our composition examples now, because we're going to be talking about them pretty soon. I believe that might be the next thing on my list. I have a specific order I'm going through things in. So yeah, just mess around with the inversions. You'll get some nicer progressions in some ways. Things that don't sound very nice in root position can actually sound amazing in inverted states. So, okay, here we have a 1-5-1. So this is you can make it up. I said I'm going to make the 1 chord, this first one, that's what I undid. I'm going to make this first one a 7 chord. So this is a 7 chord. Let me show you the original, I guess. And we'll raise that, and we'll raise this. So before is the super normal, 1-5-1, super normal. I'm like, oh, that's very nice. But let's make it a diminished 7 and see what we get. That's a little jarring right off the bat when we're just doing stuff it's oh my gosh, what has just happened? But we can invert things. And And so we're using some inversions now, and you can get smoother transitions. We'll talk about all this stuff later. But again, just an interesting example. This is one that I want you to mess around with, making the 1 a diminished 7, and then also make the 5 a diminished 7. See how it comes out for you. Here, this is just a cool chord progression, and I said here kind of loud. But if I get rid of this 7, I just like the sound of this chord progression. Let me make this major. Okay, or minor, I mean. So we have a minor to a 3. So this is a minor progression, but I raised the 5 to be major. That's not terribly uncommon. Sounds like this. So I personally am a fan of that. But let's go ahead and put back our diminished 7. Now check it out. So once again, we get a similar to effect as we do up here, and I'm using it. This is another common roll. If we take our 2 chord and make it a diminished, because 2 is actually minor in both the minor scale, and it is also minor in the major scale. So it's kind of cool like that. So 2 actually serves a really interesting way of getting to the 5 chord. And so some interesting relationships go on there. Now you got to know your scales, but we've talked about those, and you've even gone through tests on them. So it should be pretty okay. It's interesting to note that the fully diminished chord occurs naturally, meaning the notes are already in the scale, in the harmonic minor scale. So that's a scale where this thing will show up a little bit more. Okay, so let's go down. Let's look at another one. So that's just, I wanted to point out the 2 to 5 relationship there. And then we have a 1, 2, 5, 1. Again, I take advantage of it. This time I go down instead of up. And you can mess with that. I'll give you a quick listen. And then again, you could try, like, let's move this G up. That'd be nicer. And this B's kind of low. Let's move the B up too. So, you get different qualities. Pretty cool. And then down here, we have, it's the same quality moved around. I don't know what to call them. Sub-qualities. I'm sure there's a word. So now we have a 7. I put this 7 here deliberately because this was kind of what I was expecting you to make into a diminished 7. You can try whatever you want. And let me really quick undo this. So the 7's diminished just by nature here. I don't write in my diminished signs in my chord progressions yet. We will start getting a little more advanced. But our original progression would sound like this. So now it's like, and now what we have here is this is actually sort of a call to some cadences that you'll learn what this means later. But we have here a 7 to 1, and that is a very common sort of resolution deal that happens. And so 5 to 1 can be substituted for a 7 to 1 a lot of the times. And then we have a 4 to 1, which is also very common. And so I wanted you to sort of see with this one was like, hey, look, you can take it and make it a fully diminished 7 and sort of enhance the pulling motion that happens. And we could now, if you listen, this one sounds like we said something. And when we go here, going back to the 1 sounds it should have some more meat on it, right? It sounds like, yeah, we went somewhere, but it doesn't sound like we said everything we wanted to say if you listen to it as a phrase. It just sounds, I don't know, to me that's like it finished, but it was unfinished at the same time. So there's some interesting things I'd just like to point out there. And I even encourage you to mess around and try out some other 7th chords, see if you can get it to sound the way you want it to sound. So that's that. That's just exercise. I went a little more in detail than I normally do, but I feel like it's valuable insight. You can see how it's used in composition. You can say, oh, well, now when I see a 2 chord, I can have some extra things to consider, or a 5 chord. Even with the 4 chord, and if you could even make this a little more interesting of a relationship. If a phrase is coming to the end and you wanted to sound a little more dramatic, you could try messing with this. There are some pieces that actually end with a fully diminished 7 chord. It sounds very dissonant, sort of dark, and that's like a great way to establish that mood. If you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.